rhyme of the anxious navigators. The skipper and the passenger went sailing hand in hand. They wept like anything because they could not see the land. If we knew where we were, said they, then sailing would be grand. The skipper said the coastsigns were very much ajar, and the angles of the tangents were horizontally. It's really very odd, said he. We don't know where we are. On paper wrappings from their food, they placed Z, X and P. They juggled with the decimal and passed the nth degree, balanced the curve approximate and squared the apogee. The mate and cook and passenger bewailed their fearful plight. They worked out calculations through both the day and night. When you know where you are, said they, there is no need for fright. Said passenger to skipper, it's very clear to me, our course is east, south, west by north, as nearly as may be, with deviation for a drink of stronger stuff than tea. Said cookie then, the cabin is more than I can stick, and over the side, side by side, the motion did the trick. And when they lifted up their eyes, the land appeared ahead. They thought that it was Tiree. It was actually North Head. It didn't matter in the least. They went to Waiheke instead. So this was an anonymous poem amended.
Is that where you want me to stand? Okay.
Yeah. So now that we've hit the curtain raiser.
Yes. How do you follow that? Okay, well,
Z and P there, Chip.
X, Z and P, yes, yeah.
Well, the Z's probably harder.
Now, this time, it was at the beginning of the year that we talked, wasn't it? And we got ourselves to Pavoa de Vagim, a little fishing village in the north end of Portugal, quite close to Oporto. And we headed back there in March this year, which was a little bit early. The weather wasn't very nice when we got back, but we just have a little look. And this was our track for this year. We started off at Pavoa and headed off down the coast when we eventually got out, down around the coast of Portugal and into Spain, and Cadiz and Gibraltar and Morocco, which we had to go for in order to re-enter the EU again, because they have all this tax stuff and so on, and all sorts of immigration things that you've got to comply with. We spent a little bit of time in the Balearics before we headed up north to France and then across to, thanks Basil, to the northern end of Italy, which was very nice indeed. Down the west coast of Italy. We spent quite a lot of time on the west coast of Italy. It was lovely going down there. There are a number of islands down there and some good places, and eventually down around through Messina and across to Corfu and Greece, and hung around there for about a month and ended up storing the boat in a place called Previsa. So that was the overall picture of what we did this year. When we got back to Pavoa, we found that, those of you who were here last year, I had some pictures, some pretty mighty pictures of lighthouses going underwater, just right off where we were right off the little fishing village there. And the spray, even though we had big covers over the boat and everything's all lashed down, we had spray and dust, Portuguese dust, that combined together, and it formed over everything, even under the covers. It was like a cement wash over everything, and there's still pockets of it on the boat that we haven't managed to chip or get off. So that was a bit of a nuisance. The weather there wasn't any better than when we left, when we arrived back, and so of course we got held up quite extensively for about 12 days. I think we got stuck there in Pavoa. So we headed off to Porto. Porto is a wonderful city, marvellous port of course, comes down the Douro River, and so we took a bit of a trip up the Douro, and not with the boat, but on land, and we headed off up there to look at the places where they grow port, all the grapes and things. Very attractive river, and the traditional boats still carry the wine down the river until we eventually managed to get out of Pavoa. That's further down the coast. We managed to get out of Pavoa, and it was a bit of a hairy launching. The port had been closed, and eventually the police, the port police, decided to open the port one day, and so the travel of people came along and said, be ready in an hour or two, so it got forced closed off, all that sort of thing, you know, the usual stuff that you do when you're going into a place like this. And it was only about a 30-tonne travel lift, and we're just over 20 tonnes at the moment. And they lowered us down, and it looked okay in the marina, but we were there with about 6 inches yet to drop, and the boat started surging. And the boat was going backwards and forwards in the travel lift, about 2 metres. And just thundering forwards and thundering back, and it was set up a real oscillation. And I looked up at one stage as we were starting the motor, and the travel lift was bending. Or the travellers was bending like it was a little bit hairy, but there were about 15 guys came running from all directions with bits of rope and stuff and started stabilising things, and we got out, and then they took off, and we worked around into the little marina there. Again, they were all there, running out lines in all directions because the marina keeps breaking up. Whenever they have boats in the marina and the swell comes in, the whole thing, the send just works and works and works, and they have all these straps and ropes and bits and pieces just holding the marina together. We stayed there overnight, and then next morning they did open the port, and we hightailed it out of there. We weren't ready to go to sea by a long, long way, but we just got out of there and into the Atlantic and down the coast. We actually had a bit of a deadline. We wanted to be in northern Italy by the beginning of May. Originally, we planned to be there mid-May, but there's a cruising association, which is a British club. There was a chap there who was looking after a huge pile of charts and about 20-odd cruising guides for us. We thought of driving over and picking them up, but we just thought, oh no, let's sail around there. And so we were trying to get there by the beginning of May, and by the time we got in the water, it was about the 5th of April, so we really only had about 3 weeks to get down and around and up to northern Italy. So down the coast, and that is actually the castle at a place called, it's spelt Signs, but it's pronounced Cinch in Portuguese. It's the only Portuguese word I know. And it's where Vasco da Gama was born. And so that was his castle there. And that's a little bit of a statue of him. And so it was interesting to have a wander around there. And
who's the guy standing up there, though?
Oh.
I had the answer.
That's the best line so far. Yeah. And down in the southwest corner of Portugal is Cape St Vincent, and in the background, the long flat peninsula there, just a few miles away, is actually Sagres. And Sagres is where the first navigation school that we know of was where Prince Henry the Navigator had his navigation school. There's not a lot of history around it, even though it's not that long ago. It's only, 500 years or so, but that was where he, there's plenty of evidence that he took students down there and taught navigation. We tend to forget that 300 or 400 years ago, Portugal was a major world power. And it had lots of colonies all around the world, still got Goa, and of course Brazil, they speak Portuguese and so on. But Portugal was a major country in the world at that stage from an economic point of view. Headed across back to Spain again now, and this was Cadiz. And Cadiz was another very famous place. It goes right back to Roman times, both with its influence and its wealth. And because it was in such a strategic place, it was actually sacked many times and razed a number of times. They built these massive walls right around it. And there's some lovely beaches there. That's looking inside the island up into the port area. It was a wonderful port where you could actually work a ship, a square-rig ship in those days, which is not as handy as they are today, and you could get in and out of there. And so any port in the world where you could actually sail in and out of with one of those old galleons had a huge value, and Cadiz was particularly good for that. They also, a lot of sherry comes from Cadiz, and we had already filled up with port, so there was no room for the sherry. That was the only problem.
Good choice.
You can see some of the towers there that still date from a few hundred years ago. They had, all the wealthy people who lived there had their own towers, and they kept a lookout for ships coming in because it was very defensible. But a lot of history in Cadiz. And just south of Cadiz, well, that's Gibraltar, of course, but just south of Cadiz, there's another little headland, which is very, very minor. In fact, you'd hardly think it was anything, except its name is Trafalgar. So it's got quite a famous name, quite in contrast with this quite innocuous little place. Entrance to the Mediterranean, we'd been there some years before, and we'd anchored in the bay. Now they don't let you anchor in the bay, except in one place which is very exposed. And this was something that we ran into in the Mediterranean all the time. Good anchorages, which used to be there, they turn them into marinas, and the ones they don't turn into marinas, half the time they turn around and they put buoys in there, and you've got to pay quite a lot of money. Like, you know, we're talking $40, $50 a night just to sit on a buoy, or 120 to go into a marina. And so it's actually, you miss out on a number of places that you'd otherwise go to just because of the cost, really. It just mounts up if you've got to do that every night. We did spend quite a bit of time in marinas, however. But the Mediterranean was the final place, fourth place on our list of places that we wanted to go on this trip when we started off in 2011. First one was, of course, the Beagle Canal, which I talked about, and then we also wanted to go up to Nova Scotia and around that area, which we did, and also Norway. And so now the Mediterranean is the last one. And so that will mean that we're sort of starting to think, after we've been in the Med, to sort of start heading home. We've been away 5 years now, so that's long enough. Karen found a friend that she met many years ago when we were there back in the 90s, and he remembered her, so that was that was very nice. But we have to, every 18 months, we have to have the boat out of the EU for at least a day and then come back in again. So we headed across to Morocco, which of course is vastly different from Spain, and the narrow streets. But one of the things that actually struck us about Morocco and Tétouan, the town we went to, was how clean it was. It was immensely clean, and not like Spain and Portugal, where there's plenty of rubbish lying around, and Italy, of course, as we would find. Mosques everywhere. And right beside the mosques there are synagogues. There's a big Jewish quarter that lives in Tétouan. They all live in peace and are happy together, and a big Christian community as well. But it is quite different from what we're used to. These are actual streets, public streets. They go back, 2,000 years really, since the and beyond. Typical sort of bazaars and things, and plenty of rip-offs there too, but and a bit touristy. A lot of leather, but then we found the tannery, which was right in the middle of the town. Well, it's quite a big town actually, and there was this horrible smell, and the tannery is right there in the centre, and there are these people, these tannery workers, and they use things like sulfuric acid and various other things on leather to tan it. These guys were walking around in it up to their waists without any protection. Not really health and safety. It's a luxury that we have in this country. And plenty of places to buy wonderful things. You could get anything there. And there's the marina that we went to, Marina Smur, had some pretty classy boats in it as well as the odd camel and things.
The odd camel.
and we headed across to Ibiza, and I stopped there for a couple of days. It was just a tourist rip-off, not worth going to. Perfectly honestly, it was just, had nothing. And then on to Mallorca, which was much nicer. We found a place there, and we got stuck for another 10 days there because the Mistral blew and blew and blew. And we're talking, you know, predicted winds of 50 plus knots, which is not sort of very much fun. We were out of it down there, but it's coming out of the Gulf of Lions there. I sort of wondered about it because it's not a very big patch, but it is very windy. And I sort of wondered whether we should go. And later on we found that there'd been a French yacht had departed from Marseille and hasn't been seen since. So it was pretty fresh.
So,
But yeah,
that Mistral,
yes.
is it like the Canterbury Nor'wester, very gusty and strong? Or is
Yes, it just comes
solid,
down that...
straight, constant,
It's
strong?
pretty constant, and it blows right down across Corsica.
Yeah.
It just comes down the Leon, the Leon Valley, and from Leon there down the Rhone, and it really does honk, and it lasts for days at a time, and so it's not like a firm wind in Canterbury.
Okay.
But Mallorca was nice. Again, we had to pick up a mooring, and we tried anchoring one night, but it was a bit exposed, so we went back to the mooring again. But there was a nice wooden train that took us across to the north side of the island, and there we found another little bay that used to be there 20 years ago. There was nothing there. Now there's taverns and marinas. This is what's happening all the time. It's just developing and developing. There are not hundreds but thousands of marinas there, and boats galore. They're just, it really is sort of over the top. And when you talk about marinas, Westhaven's an average size for the marinas that we're talking about. So by this stage we were, it was the beginning of May, and we were a week late getting to our, getting on to northern Italy. And we eventually got up there. We went through France. Well, we anchored in France for a few hours and then headed on across past all these places. And Karen was not very pleased with me. You know, that one over there's Monaco, and that's the Riviera, and as we sailed right past. But up in the mountains, up in the Sierra Nevadas, up in Spain, there was snow on the hills, and similarly up in the Alps, there was plenty of snow around still at the end of April. But eventually, cruising associate, we arrived at Carrara there, and that's it's a working port with a small marina and a club there that made us very welcome. And our cruising association host arrived with his dog, and soon helped us get our passport stamped, because getting officials in these countries is quite hard. They don't come to you, you go to them, and then half the time they don't want to see you anyway. It's too much trouble. But if you don't have the right paperwork, you can get into trouble later on. So, you know, it's a bit of a hassle. Customs didn't want to know us. We had a piece of paper from Morocco. They wouldn't re-enter us into the EU. No, you've got a piece of paper from Morocco, don't worry about it. Whereas in Holland, we had about a 6-page form to fill out, and it was all stamped and notarised and everything else. Whereas down in the Mediterranean, they just didn't want to know. Those mountains, snow, as I talked about before, very impressive. But it's not snow, they're actually marble.
What?
It is marble.
Ah.
And this is in Tuscany, near La Spezia, and that's Carrara, the port is Carrara. So in any case, we were now about 10th of March, but 10th of May, but everything was going along nicely. We went off and started to enjoy the Italian cheeses and wines and all the wonderful Italian food, and ended up in a place called Lucca. They've got a very good train system in Italy. It's very cheap too. And we ended up in a little place called Lucca, where we had we were enjoying food and things, and that's Puccini. I never knew Puccini came from Lucca, but there it is, and found a statue of him, so I took a photo. Wonderful Italian architecture in marble, and often they keep the facade, and the facade is different from the rest of it. Buildings are magnificent, of course, in Italy, as we know. This was a building that took my fancy. It actually goes back to pre-Roman times, and the foundations are pre-Roman. But if you actually have a look there, all the way up, there's all these different types of construction as it's been pulled down and put up again. And so there are probably about 10 different lots of construction of different types through the last couple of thousand years. We decided, somebody suggested to us that we go up into the Marble Mountains and into the mines up there. And so we hired a guy, and we found this actually worked quite well. For about the price of staying in a marina for the night, you can hire a personal guide for about 3-4 hours. And he turned up with a very traditional Land Rover Jeep type thing, very much four-wheel drive of the rustic type. And off we went up into the mountains. It was a little bit rainy, but we wanted to go up and have a look at the marble mines, and that was quite amazing. The size and the scale of it, where they actually are carving out chunks of marble that are the size of a 3-story office block. And they actually cut them out with these bandsaw-like machines that they sort of stick in underneath, and they're all nice and square and things. And it is, it's on a scale that it's hard to describe. But you can see down at the bottom there, in the distance, over, where is it? There. That's a big machine, a great big sort of tractor thing. And you can see the height of the blocks that they cut out and how they pull them out and cut them up. We went to several of the mines, including the one where Michelangelo got all his marble from. They've taken a fair bit of marble out of there, and what we never realised was the differences in the colours of marble. It's actually very, very widely coloured, but the pure white stuff is worth about several times more expensive than the coloured. And these blocks of huge chunks. It was quite sort of awe-inspiring. And there you can see the building, you can see the tractor, the machine, and the size of the cliffs that they create. The port of Carrera ships over a million tons of marble every year. It does nothing else but ship marble. That's all that comes out of there. This is actually a wire that is probably only about 10 centimetres, and all along it has got these little round studs, which are diamond, and they can cut through a block that's 20 feet high, and they can cut through 20 feet of it in about half an hour with this wire with these studs on it. And that's how they drive it. There's a machine there that's this long wire, and then they just link it over a couple of things, like one of the old film projectors, I suppose. And they just wind it up and pull it back, and another chunk of marble cut out. And they have a thing like it's sort of like a chainsaw, and it's 20 feet long, and they cut that in at the bottom of the slab, and they literally cut it off at the bottom before they start putting the wires through. We did actually look at buying some marble, but not much room on the boat. There wasn't quite enough room to take a statue like this, which is David. It's an exact replica of Michelangelo's David in the same pure white marble.
Wow.
Obviously and you can see he's lying down there. It's computer driven. It's to the millimetre, and you can order them. There's a waiting list for getting them. I'm quite sure Trump's got one. We could have had one too. 800,000 New Zealand dollars, and we could have brought one back. Carry on, baggage, yes. So we decided not to do that. Oh, that's the River Arno. Karen, we took her to lunch at Pisa, and I wasn't that keen to go to Pisa because, it's very touristy and things. But it was actually a very nice tower. It is actually quite beautiful when you see it. But even nicer than the tower are the other two buildings there, the other two buildings, the Duomo and the Baptistry that are there. They are actually even nicer buildings. Oh, and I can see Basil's been there and he agrees. So just north of La Spezia, or just north of Carrera, we found a lovely little anchorage up close to La Spezia harbour, and then headed up for something that Karen had talked me into doing. It sounded like a lot of work, but it was walking along a track called the Cinque Terre, or the five earths, or 5 places, where these villages cling to a hillside, and it was actually it was a very nice walk. We went out on a train and through the mountains and things, and along with all the other tourists, and incredible number of tourists in these places. And that was one of the things that we found, just tourists everywhere. So that took some of the gloss off it. But that's one of the little villages. That's Vernazza, and that's the railway line that goes along the coast there. It really is a very, very scenic. From there, that's typical of the coastal villages and things. That's Ponte Vedere, isn't it? And in any case, that's near La Spezia, and there are little marinas, and you can anchor in a lot of these places, provided you anchor out like in the harbour here. We went on to Elba, island off the out at sea there, in the Ligurian Sea, and that was a place that was not bad for a prison. That was Napoleon's house. He got shunted off there with his staff and servants, and of course he had wonderful gardens and a very nice lifestyle. You'd think that that'd be worthwhile staying there, but he escaped, and so they sent him to St Helena instead. That's the view from the top of the hill there down over into the harbour at Elba. Another very fine natural harbour that was great. Perhaps that's also the marina at Elba. Perhaps our favourite place was in Italy was a little island further south called Giglio. And Giglio is it's a day sail down from Elba, and we went in there, and I had an anchorage on the chart. It looked good, and so I thought, we'll go in there and anchor, and then there were sort of warnings up all around, no, you can't anchor here. And I looked, and I saw this big crane there too, and I thought, we're doing something. So we went in and found ourselves a berth in this tiny, tiny little harbour where a small ferry, not much bigger than the Half Moon Bay ferry, came and went, and it had to back out. It was so small in the harbour. It was really very, very tight in there, and it was squeezed in. And there was quite a bit of a send there too, so it didn't do our fenders any good. But it's been preserved as a historic site, a World Heritage Site, I think. But there's a castle, a huge castle up on the hill, and it's quite a steep hill, a long way up, so we went up in the bus. And each one of those entrances is an apartment, and most of the people who live there live in these apartments, and there's a few touristy taverns along the waterfront. Other than that, it's absolutely original. It's really a lovely place, and that's sort of the village that's just beside the castle up on top of the hill, so it's very authentic and not very many tourists, although it does get a lot of Italian tourists in summer. Very few foreign tourists because they don't know about it. But it became quite famous, this place, a year or two ago, when somebody who was showing off and had some crew on board who lived on Giglio decided to go a little bit close. And the Costa Concordia bumped a rock, opened up the bottom, and then about half a mile further south, right off the entrance to the marina there, and there's the marina is down in the forefront there, and the place I wanted to anchor was in that bay. No. You're not allowed to. That was where she capsized, and the big crane, huge crane are there, and barges are still cleaning up the seabed. But it was a totally unnecessary accident, of course. There's again the marina, as you can see, it's tiny there. We're just sort of in one spot there alongside, and the barges and the crane are still cleaning up. That's the mainland, not too far from Rome in the background. And we're tied up there to the seawall, and just along the seawall there's a little white statue. That's the memorial to the 32 people who died on a very calm night, mostly in their cabins late at night. And why they died when the ship only rolled over on its side like that is a bit of conjecture, but it was probably because they were young people. They had generally young who died. They were obviously had a good party and had turned in, and then when the lights went out and the ship started to list, they had a problem that they couldn't cope with. And the crew didn't do a particularly wonderful job either. The master, he actually, after they'd grounded initially, he actually then asked for dinner to be sent to his, for two to be sent to his cabin, his private cabin. Subsequently, when she grounded again and started to roll over, he managed to slip accidentally and land in the lifeboat. Well before most of the passengers and crew had left, the Coast Guard, they ordered him back on board, and he had an excuse he didn't get back on board. The courts, they've called him Captain Chicken in Italy, and the courts gave him 18 years for manslaughter. And while we were there, actually, it was quite interesting because I was following it in the paper, and his appeals were unsuccessful, so they have locked him up. And it wasn't the first time he'd had an accident either. He'd had another praying and entering a port once before. But the embarrassment for the Italians, and they did an absolutely incredible job of righting the ship and refloating it, a remarkable billion-dollar piece of engineering. But we left Tuscany behind and headed on south and went to Rome, where we spent 4 weeks. We found that the cost of the marina for 10 days was the same as it was for a month. So we hopped into a marina there and then spent 3 weeks on having a look at Rome and Italy, and also we hopped on the Eurail and just the usual sites around Rome that I think most of you have seen. Loved the drinking fountains, but and we headed up actually finally, that's also the Tiber River, not very useful. The Vatican, which was a big disappointment. A beer in Italy, you can get a big handle for about $4 or $5, much cheaper than here. It's about $30 in the Vatican at a cafe. I found out after I'd ordered it too. Too many people, just far too many people in the Vatican. It was very expensive and it was quite disappointing. We were going to go to Pompeii, but just close by where the boat where we were moored in the marina was a place called Ostia Antica. And this is a city that was within 20 miles of Rome at the mouth of the Tiber River, and it was an industrial city that fed a lot of stuff to Rome. They did all the baking for Rome and took it up to Rome each day. It was, and they're actually excavating it now. Now there are hardly any tourists there. It's cheap to get in. They've got a very, very good visitors centre, and it's absolutely fascinating. And as I say, no tourists. And so it's beautifully preserved. Yeah, we're going back over 2,000 years, of course, and it's got its own theatre and so on. They take school kids in Italy there rather than taking them to Pompeii, and that was the entrance to the bakehouse, I believe, if I remember rightly. And they had their own centre of government there as well. But and then we headed off on the rail and ended up in Venice, of course. We found some nice little quiet places in Venice, as one does, but mostly it is wall-to-wall tourists. The usual sort of stuff around Venice. There is a marina close to there, but of course you've got to go well north on the eastern side. I don't think we're going to go up there. Gondolas galore, heaps of Chinese people paying 80 euros each for an hour sitting in a gondola being paddled along. And 2 companies have bought up all the gondolas. Nobody else is allowed to have a gondola now.
Okay.
Usual sort of thing that happens. And then on to Vienna, which was a wonderful city, lovely architecture. And one of my favourite cities was Salzburg, which up in Austria. We enjoyed Austria very much. And of course, it's got a huge history. Various people, Stalin lived there at one stage, Hitler lived there, Mussolini lived there. All sorts of history, of course. And the most famous person there, of course, was Mozart. And they have wonderful concerts. We missed one just by chance up on the castle. We could have gone to a dinner concert. But it's a beautiful city. And I've forgotten the name of the river it's on. Mozart's house, where he was born, is a fabulous museum. You're not allowed to take photographs inside, but there's a lot of his original scores, instruments, and a very, very well put together history of his life. So that was good. That's just a typical Austrian scene. If you like the west coast of New Zealand, you'd like Austria. It's well organised, it's neat and tidy, everything works, and it's not super expensive. New Zealand is now as expensive as anywhere in the world, I think. We could wander around the countryside there. That's near Innsbruck, and it was just very, very pleasant indeed. And on to Prague. No, actually, that's Germany. It's Rottenburg. We went up to Rottenburg and enjoyed totally different architecture, and of course the completely different history up there. Just move along because I didn't come here for a travel thing. It's more maritime, isn't it? That was we spent some time walking right around the walled city, up in the walls that go back again. Many, many hundreds of years, right back to 500 or 600 AD, and the walled city and the type of construction was quite fascinating actually, and how they used wood and clay to build houses, and they're still standing. They wouldn't pass New Zealand standards, they'd probably leak or something. Munich was very nice. Karin loved the orange machine. Go and put in a few euros and press a button and you get a glass of orange juice. Prague, went up to Prague to catch up with our youngest son and his wife who were there at a conference, and so we spent a week in Prague, and that was very nice. The usual sort of stuff there. Prague is actually very prone to flooding, and they had a flood about 20 years ago that came up to the second story in many of the buildings. So we don't hear about a lot of these things here. That's of course Prague again, a famous bridge. And on the way back down we then visited Florence, another wonderful city with the most amazing architecture, but I think many of you have been to these places. Quite taken with the street art, what people can do with pastels these days. And so back to the boat and on south, and that is an island that we all know about called Capri. Certainly when we left the marina in Rome, as we came in, we had the day before a westerly gale. Had wonderful sailing. The trouble was that it was breaking in the entrance to the marina, which was not very wide, even though the marina was large inside, and not very deep. We were down to sort of about 0.5 under the keel, and there was a big swell running in there. We called up and checked with the guy. Going up the Tiber to another marina would have even been worse into the entrance there. It's very shallow around there. We called up the marina and the guy said, "Oh yes, it'll be fine. Be very careful." Well, thank you. That's particularly useful. However, Capri, where there are non-stop ferries coming and going at high speed, with lots of important people and lots of mega yachts, and we looked at the price of the marina and went right past. But the actual island itself reminded us very much of just what it's like around Cape Brett, and everybody here has been around Cape Brett, and it did look, it looked and felt like that. And on along the coast to a little place called Amalfi. Again, a tiny marina, which we heard where there was a bit of a surge in it, and so we decided to anchor off. And Amalfi, of course, the Amalfi coast is very spectacular for about 5 or 8 miles. It is absolutely gorgeous.
What causes these surges around the marinas?
You'd think the Mediterranean's calm, but there are actually quite strong tides there. Further on, just a bit south of here, the Straits of Messina run at 5 knots at times, and the tide is only sort of a third of a metre. And 1 or 2 places a bit more, over on the African coast, but very little tide, but quite strong tidal streams, and you find yourself sort of wondering why you're down to 4 knots, and it's just tide. Other times you're bowling along. So there's actually some quite strong streams there, which surprised us. That was one of the big surprises. It was a little bit rolly outside there, but we looked at these buildings hanging on the side of the cliff there, and there's a little French yacht anchored just inside us, and I couldn't help thinking, gosh, those buildings look vulnerable. Italy has lots of earthquakes, as we know, just like here, and of course it was about 400 years ago. Amalfi disappeared into the Mediterranean, and they rebuilt it. But it was a lovely place to spend the night, and that's just as we left in the morning. Absolutely wonderful scenery. And Tropea, that's further south, getting down towards the Straits of Messina. Again, that was a place that we looked at the cliffs and wondered about the buildings there and how they would stand up if it did get a bit shaky. And then there's a narrow pass between Sicily and Italy, of course, the Straits of Messina. And even though the tides are just an inch or 2, there's a place called Scylla there. And at the northern end of the strait, in Homer's Odyssey, talks about the whirlpool of Scylla and Charybdis that way back in ancient Greek mythology, and ships 2000 BC, 4,000 years ago, sank in the whirlpool there. Although it seems that the whirlpool is not as bad as it was in those days. We didn't see any sign of a whirlpool, but we found it really scary. These sword fishing boats, they haven't got a huge beam on them, and we saw these things coming along. Oh, look, there's a guy way up at the top of that mast. There were 3 guys up there. And I sort of was trying to do some mental calculations and, seeing how centre of gravity and centre of buoyancy and thinking, I hope they've got it right, because it didn't look very right to me. And when they did do a tight turn, they seemed to loll quite a lot as they went round, and eventually came back up again. But it wasn't very convincing that I would want to be on board. But I guess there are lots of boats around there and plenty of people around, so they'll fish them out of the drink if they do have a problem.
What's the need for the eye?
Well, so they go out there and they're just looking for swordfish so they can go and catch them.
So 3 spots, that's 3 spotters.
3 spotters. And there are guys that are bigger than you. Quite weird. We were also getting down into the southern Italy part there. We were starting to get a little bit thoughtful about the influx of people from the Mediterranean and from northern Africa across the Mediterranean there, and also, of course, further east you've got the Syrian refugees as well.
Yeah.
And it was, I think every yachtsman there knows that they may come across some people in distress, and there's a pretty clear protocol as to how you handle it. You've got to help them. The law, the international law of the sea overrides all local laws. And so you have that protection, but convincing some Italian or Greek customs officer of this. So the protocol is that, yes, you do help them, you give them what assistance they absolutely need. If they claim to be refugees, you cannot return them to where they came from or anything like that, but you also make sure that you get on the radio and talk immediately and make sure it's all quite clear. But those yachts that have had to help somebody haven't got into any trouble provided they've done things the right way, and they haven't even been held up from moving along. So it was a bit of a worry. We didn't see anything of the refugees at all. We did hear some stuff on the VHF a couple of nights, but we didn't see anything, except at a place called Crotone, which is down in the inside the instep of Italy, where we first of all, walking around there in the naval secure part of the port, we saw several quite large yachts and launches that were all just derelict and half sunk, and they had been used for trafficking people. And then we came across a huge pile, a monstrous pile of runabouts and small boats and dinghies, often with outboards and stuff still in them, full of gear and so on. They're all just piled up behind the fence, where they've obviously come ashore, and they just pick them up with a forklift and put more on the pile. What they're going to do with them, I don't know. What do you do with a big pile of fiberglass? Anyway, as we moved on, we then got down into Greece and went to Corfu. Our final country for the year was Greece, and it's just a day sail across from Italy. The first thing we found was that we were actually closer to Albania in some cases than we were to Corfu. Very, very close there, the coastline. And we did wonder about officialdom in Greece and what was in store. And we eventually found the office of the port police. He said, no, you've got to go to another office down here. So we went off in the boat, entered into a marina. Now, Greece gets a lot of money from the EU. It's one of those countries that gets lots of help. And every town seems to need a new marina for the fishing boats. So they order this up, and the EU hands out a whole lot of money. Used to come from England, it doesn't now. And gives them a whole lot of money, and they build this. But the Greeks are expected to put money in as well. But they usually run out. And this lovely new marina, quite a small one, but lovely new marina, right in the heart of the town at Corfu there. We went in and we wondered why there was nobody there, but we soon found out. They had run out of money, and what they'd shortcutted on was that they decided not to actually move the sewer from discharging into the marina to discharging somewhere else. So the marina is the sewer outlet for the town. However, it was free. We could tie up there for nothing. And I wandered off. But
Did you hold a hook over it?
No, we sort of held our noses, and I walked for about a mile and a half in the hot sun, and eventually got directed to the right place, and then it was close to the cruise liners that were in there, a couple of cruise liners in there with people coming and going everywhere. And ended up going into this big hall where there were lots of people and lots of security places and things, and I got mixed up in amongst all this baggage that was being screened and x-rayed for going on the ships and things, and had to climb over the top of all this stuff and then through some police tapes, and eventually found myself with the right person. He said, oh yes, this is the right person, and he relieved me of the sum total of 30 euros for a cruise permit and said, welcome to Greece. Now go next door to the big building there and go and see the man there, which I did. He blew his stack because I'd come to the wrong place. And everybody laughed at him. And we eventually found ourselves back with the original port policeman. He said, oh yes, I'll stamp that for you. He said, now, go off into the Ionian, go and have a cruise. And he said, a couple of places, stop by the police there and get a couple of stamps in your log so that it looks okay, and then when you come back to me, it'll be fine. And that was the sum total of our entry into Greece. However, this was a little island just south of Corfu called, I think it was Antipaxos, and the water there is just so beautiful. It is warm. It is quite saline. It is so clear. You look 30, 40 feet from, even when there's a ripple on the water, you can see 30, 40 feet. It's just Very, very nice indeed. It was rather hot, so it was a 6 a.m. walk if you're going to have a walk, because by the time it gets to 8, it's up around 30 degrees. So it wasn't so nice. So we went wandering around, very safe, lovely, very nice people. But the beaches, when you actually get away from all the tourist traffic and all the charter boats are another story altogether. But when you get away from them, there are some lovely places there that are on your own, and not much wind. Down in the Ionian Sea, because that's where we are, generally it's pretty calm most of the day, but at 3 o'clock in the afternoon it gets up to 20 knots and lasts for a couple of hours and then dies down again. But then you get the thunderstorms. And talk about that in a minute. That's typical fishing boats and some of the places that we ended up going around the Ionian. Lovely anchorage there at the north end of Corfu. Everybody knows about Greek ouzo, but Greek wine is something else again. And we were sort of studiously avoiding it. We made sure we had plenty of Italian wine, but Greek wine I wasn't very interested in. However, we went ashore and had a cup of coffee at a taverna, and the man said, "To come back tonight to my taverna, I'll give you a free bottle of wine." So we went and had dinner there, and he produced a bottle of very, very nice Chardonnay-style Greek wine, and it was excellent. So they can make good wine, but it's a bit hard to find. In a lot of these places, there are plenty of tourist boats that turn up, charter boats. That's actually over at Ithaca, just a little bit further south, the home of Odysseus.
So Jim, is that anchoring there?
We're anchored there, yes, in the big harbour there. We're at anchor, and but all in along the shore, you go in and you drop the anchor, pull the stern in, and somebody comes along and takes some money. Now, a lot of places in Greece, they didn't charge very much for this, but they do have quite a lot of rats. It's quite clean, but we prefer to anchor out anyway. We'd far sooner be out on the pick than tied up with all the other people there and all the tavernas and all the noise that you get.
What kind of depth of places like that?
We were anchoring in 8 metres.
Oh, fine.
Yeah, just like here. So around Greece, we never had any shortage of anchorages in Greece. It was mainly Italy that anchoring was more difficult. Lots of yachts from Europe there. English people keep their boats there. They actually haul them out of the water, and they can actually do a deal with one of the boat yards there where they come down twice from England for 6 weeks at a time, do their sailing. The boat's then lifted out and stored, and it's ready back in the water when they tell them they're coming back. So there's a lot of movement around Europe, and especially down to Greece, where people store their boats. But there are lots and lots of charter boats. They come by the flotilla load, and you can see maybe 3-4 flotilla. You can go into a lovely little anchorage where there's hardly anybody, and then 4 o'clock in the afternoon they start to arrive, one flotilla after another with a flotilla leader. And in some cases, the people who've hired boats there are so inept that they come in, they then wait for the flotilla leader to come out off his yacht. He's tied up. He comes out in his dinghy, gets on board theirs, shows them where to put down the anchor, does it for them, then backs the boat in and ties it up for them, because they're not even capable of doing that. And so this goes on, and there were some companies that when we saw that lot, we'd go. Some of the companies were not quite as bad as that. Then the weather does some funny things. In the evening, you quite often see thunderstorms start to build up in the hills, particularly in the Ionian, down around Capilonium. And if you do see a little bit of thunder like that, it just seems to be in the distance, but generally within an hour, you're going to end up with about 40 knots, 30 to 40 knots in a rain squall that lasts usually about half an hour, and then it all goes away again. Now, with the ability of a number of these charter boats to anchor and to moor, you can imagine the chaos. The ones that are tied up alongside, first 1 or 2 start moving their anchors, and the next lot is like a row of dominoes as they all crunch into each other. Either that or a swell comes up quite quickly and they start breaking up their boarding platforms at the back, and there's crunching and things as they surge aft, and because they're tied too close. Others go at anchor, and then they start dragging their anchors. And I can remember one night in Ithaca, was it Ithaca? No, it was actually up at Lefkas, and they were out there, and we could see the squall coming, and next thing you could see it coming down the harbour, and the boats were sort of whacked over 45 degrees and things. Some of them would start to drag, and all this was either at dusk or just after dark. And this yacht, about a 60-foot Italian boat, starts dragging past us. He was going at about 1 knot between us and an Australian guy. Now, everybody has their fenders out when they're at anchor in Greece, for the obvious reason. This guy's there, and he's going past us backwards. He wasn't very far away, just quite close, and I said, "I think you're dragging." He said, "Yes, I am." And he stood there behind the steering wheel. And I said, "You think you should do something about it?" He said, "I am on my own." And he stood there, which was particularly useful information. "You think you should let out a bit of anchor cable?" "Oh, okay." Reached forward, pushes a button, cable rumbles out, goes on a bit, and he stopped dragging. Well, as soon as he stopped dragging, he jumped in his dinghy and went back to the taverna. Came back about 2 hours later with his girlfriend. So you do get some wallies over there. Never mind. Where are we now? Okay, this is out of Ithaca, and around the all around the village there, 2 supermarkets, but it's wonderful old and really good stuff. Again, Ithaca, little fishing village, beautiful, it's clean. We actually left the boat in Marina and Corfu for a month at about this time, and headed up to our niece's wedding in England, and a quick stop in Norway as well, back to see some relatives, and before we came back. And it's all very quaint and very nice there. That's actually, I don't know whether you can see it there. Well, that's the foreshore where the all the mega yachts and the yachts and the charter boats all tie up, and we just anchor out here, and they pay a whole lot of money to tie up there, and it's very noisy. And we did get one rat aboard when we went ashore in the dinghy one night for dinner, and the next night we heard the scuffling and set a trap, and very quickly it actually caught Mr. Rat before he'd done really any damage at all, because rats very quickly can do damage. We worked out that the only way he got aboard was he came aboard with us on the dinghy. While we were tied up eating ashore, he'd obviously crawled into the dinghy and hid in the dinghy, and then came up the painter. But they have been known on yachts anchored close in, or boats anchored close in, to swim out and climb up an anchor cable. So rats can be a very serious problem, and of course you can't insure against them. Again, these are just anchorages and places where you'd spend the night and swim. Little Greek Orthodox churches everywhere. And we went wandering around Ithaca quite a bit. Ithaca was a lovely island. It was probably our favourite island in Greece, actually. It's not very big, or probably the size of Waiheke. And it's got, of course, it's all got the Odyssey and Homer there. And Karine, I take a lot of photographs, but Karine said, "Look, I want you to sit just here. I want to take a shot." We arranged ourselves a private tour.